having me here. So I'm not a geographer, nor do I deal with geolocated photos, but I do deal with a lot of data. And the talk that I brought here today is about how data get made, how the social media data come to be. And the study itself was a study of the Eastern Ukrainian conflict. So rather than collecting data online, we actually went there, and I spent some time in Eastern Ukraine talking to the soldiers that produce the data that is then used. So let me tell you a little bit about that. The thing is that war and technology are all bedfellows, and a lot of the technologies that we use now were created with military backing, and initially for reasons of military, but then became things that we use now. So this is GPS and the first computers and even the internet. And civilian and military technologies continue to be interconnected. As these technologies become something part of the civilian practice, they also become really very much part of the fact that the people that are in the military and engage in military conflict are also very much using these same technologies. So this is the fitness tracking app Strava decided to give away location of secret US Army bases. So of course they didn't. But what they did was they made certain kinds of data public. What they didn't realize is that turned out US soldiers use Strava a lot. Because the way that the data was used or produced, what people didn't realize was that certain data streams were actually public, that they were producing, and when they got released, you had some problems because suddenly certain locations became visible. And of course, what happens whenever these kinds of intersections between the data that's being produced and the purposes or the way that where the people are located intersects in these sort of unusual and unforeseen ways, institutions that become exposed then move to change how technology is used. So now US military is reviewing security practices after the fitness app reveals this information, so they're not allowed to use this fitness app anymore, and they're now getting training and thinking about whether data is public or not. But the publicness of social media data is incredibly valuable to researchers. So a lot of the things that we've been talking about today do rely on public data, either for verification purposes, through media reports, or through social media data. And what's interesting now is that social media data very much also drives a lot of media reports, and the official media reports are kind of feeding on the kind of social media content that is produced by individuals. So let me tell you a little bit about the particular war that I was interested in. This is typically called Europe's Forgotten War. It's a war that's still going on. It's in Eastern Ukraine. And whether it is classified, actually I'm curious, whether it's classified as an internal conflict or if it's classified as something that Russia is involved in, that is still sort of up for question. There's a lot of denial on the part of Russia that Russian soldiers are directly involved in this conflict. So let me, this is the map of Ukraine, and here you see essentially that is the region that is in conflict, and my colleagues and I spent a lot of time sort of in this city right here. So right near, the city of Mariupol did see some action in 2015, but hasn't seen it since, but the line of conflict is about 20 kilometers from the city. So you can actually hear the mortar fire. So it's a very tense area and very tense region, and a lot of the soldiers that engage in action alongside this particular line come to Mariupol. We also spent some time on the Russian side talking to the Russian soldiers and Russians that engaged in this conflict. So we did this for a couple of years. Let me give you just a tiny bit of background. In November 2013, you probably have heard, it was the event was called Euromaidan in Ukraine. That gave rise to some fairly violent outcomes. First, Russia decided to annex the Crimean Peninsula, which is still a contested issue, then certain parts of Ukraine proclaimed independence from the state of Ukraine and named themselves People's Republics. So this is what now is called the non-government controlled territories in Ukraine. And in September 2014, after the initial bloodshed, there was a Minsk Protocol ceasefire agreement. And then, since then, they've had agreements every few months. So this is the Easter ceasefire agreement was on March 30th. The Christmas ceasefire agreement was on December 2nd. It got broken by December 4th. So they get broken all the time. And there's a lot of people dead, and they're still dying. The casualties, this is from December 2017, and I'm currently waiting for OHCHR to come up with, give us new casualties. The injuries are only increasing. So this is sort of the area, and the interesting thing about it, so from the beginning, this was a contested war of contested classification, whether this was actually an internal civil war or whether it was perpetuated by the neighboring country of Russia, and how involved Russia was. From the very beginning, one of the things that seemed to expose what was happening in this conflict actually happened through social media. So as the conflict had started in that spring, by July, what we're starting to see was that Russian soldiers were posting images on social media that seemed to confirm that they were actually, in fact, deployed in Ukraine. These images then would get taken down, they would get documented, and things like that. What we're seeing is actually really violent imagery. So this is actually an image of 3 Russian soldiers, and in front of them are dead bodies in blood. And they're taking pictures with them. Here's another one. These are all profiles on the social media site Conductive, which is the Russian version of Facebook, and these kinds of images continue to be posted. So the interesting thing is that at the time, Russia was denying everything, but there was an enormous amount of social media content that was posted that seemed to speak to the contrary. At the same time, a lot of people started taking notice of this and started taking notice of the fact that the data were available. And some got together to do what is now termed digital forensics, which is a process of taking the kinds of images that get produced online and trying to figure out what is actually going on. So this is the site Bellingcat that initially the original effort that Bellingcat got involved in was trying to determine what happened to MH17, which was a Malaysian airliner that was shot down above Ukraine. And what you see there is one of the first articles that Bellingcat had posted, and the first thing that you see is a tweet. That's a tweet that, in fairly, actually bad language, says, wow, something hit over from that side. So this is geolocated, and it's time-stamped, and it actually completely confirms with the time where the airliner was down. So the thing is, these kinds of images, Bellingcat since then has become a site that does enormous amounts of this sort of forensic development and forensic investigation across the world's violent events and various conflicts. And what they do is really both using geodata, a lot of Google Earth, as well as many open source sources, and they're triangulating that with social media data. So you can see that you have these images, some of them actually come from posts that people make on either Instagram or Twitter or any other social media sites, and some of them come from other sources as well as from media. So they use, this is the press center, one of the Russian press centers, and so they release images and the site collects them and they try to geolocate them. This is from RT News, you can see it out there. Again, you were seeing what they're doing is they're taking these images and they're trying to geolocate them as to where they are, and using these images and the geolocation as part of that forensic development. So here you have, and what they also do is they use selfies. So there's a large number of selfies that you see on Instagram that is incredibly useful data for geolocating and figuring out where these images are, where the conflicts are, where the machinery is, and what's happening. So in some ways, this is an attempt to create a kind of truth that uses all of this data online, visual data, to try and understand and map and to some extent argue against some of the dominant narratives about these conflicts and what they are. The problem is that once now that Bellingcat is quite established, they have now become a source for the dominant narratives that then get constructed. So we went to Ukraine, because in part one of the things that we wanted to know was, okay, why do the soldiers post this? Don't they know? Don't they know that this is exposure? And what we found was something actually quite harrowing. And it's that military technologies have both problems, they're military problems, and they're assets. And there are many, many different ways and reasons for why these technologies are used. So there are certainly these contemporary devices, they're problematic. They're very fragile, and they can reveal the location of their users to the enemy, which actually, in both Ukraine and in the conflict, what's happening is the signals that from the mobile devices are used for targeting. So the soldiers know very well if a number of them are sitting in the bunker and are using Facebook or whatever other social media with their mobile devices, they're then representing, they are then sufficiently dense representation of a potential target. And some of them get killed because of that, and they all know that, and yet they continue to use these devices. This is something that we had as a discussion with the soldiers over and over. Yes, we know. Yes, well, the mortar will fly in, then then you decide how lucky you are. That will stop them from using the device for a while, but not for long. So the military knows this, and the military is very much interested in constraining this. So not only does the military on both sides, both the Russian military and the Ukrainian military have strong restrictions on the use of social media for the soldiers. This is what every Ukrainian new recruit gets as this is just part of the kind of list of suggestions, instructions. This is actually a military order that the Ukrainian soldiers get on what they're supposed to do with their phones. Clearly, the military knows that they're not going to leave their phones behind. What you then also see here is this in particular is really interesting. So this is a military order, and what they're saying is, yes, you're watched by both. Security services on both sides don't make their job easier. This is something that is imparted as part of understanding what's going on. And yet they use it. And they use it for various reasons. One is for keeping in touch. It's because if they try to take these phones away, they would be a riot. Which is crazy, but it's the way it is. There's reasons for it. They're under-resourced, there's lack of trust in government, they want alternative safety nets, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to be very, very quick. But this is the biggest reason why a lot of these images are created. Because the basic reality of war is boredom. Because by and large, these people are bored. And you have to understand that when they're that bored, what they're doing is they're creating images, social media images that they're putting online. And where some of these are selfies in the bunker, some of these are very violent images. And they're images of them trying to deal with the absurdities of war. They're connected with the social media that they have to a reality that is completely devoid of the kind of violence that they see every day. And there's this attempt to try and post the experience, which is what we do now. We post our experiences, we document. And this documentation is continuous. And because this is going on, the commanders are trying to limit this. So there's an interesting thing that happens. The soldiers are using social media. They're posting these images. The images are often posted publicly. If they're not posted publicly, eventually they make it to some sort of stream that is public. That is then used by things like Bellingcat and many researchers to geolocate and to try and create new and different and alternative narratives. At the same time, all of these soldiers know they're making themselves visible, and yet they do it anyway. So, of course they know, of course they're watching, they realize they're being watched, and it doesn't stop. So the interesting thing there is that what we have is this key infrastructure war in eastern Ukraine is mobile technologies, and it's civilian uses of mobile technologies that are not only used for targeting when enemies start firing, but they're also actually used for keeping a lot of people more or less sane in a really terrible situation. And what we observed is this high level of awareness of surveillance and potential data leakage, and yet they continue to produce it, and it's used for digital surveillance and digital forensics. And so the question then is what to do? From a researcher point of view, this is amazing, and this continues to be produced. But on the other hand, what are the responsibilities here, and whose responsibilities are these? How to think about it, because, well, while Contact is owned by Russia, and of course the Russians are quite happy to use the data, Facebook and Instagram are owned by Facebook, and what are the responsibilities of Facebook at that point is also questionable. Whether the Ukrainian military gets the data from Instagram and Facebook is not clear. So, and then I'm just going to ask questions.
Thank you very much, Irina. Time for one quick question.
All right. Sure.
David?
Sure, right. Do you think, so you mentioned that the use of mobile phones helps the soldiers stay sane and some of our, so do you think overall there's a benefit to the smartphone use because of the like mental health benefits or something, even though there's this risk, you know, if we were to compare to like 50 years ago during World War II or something, when there weren't the phones, there wasn't this risk, but there was the greater danger of mental health or something?
I don't think that there's any way that we can actually say that. I think modern military conflicts are a different sort of thing. They happen in a different environment, and different expectations of connectivity and media, and what this connectivity represents, and how we are used to, what are the expectations of being connected and being able to interact. So I don't think you can make that sort of, now it's better. Now we just had a very different conflicts.
Thanks very much, Irina.